Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Nice greetings from Colombia to my old or new friends. Regarding the general idea of our panel, I entitled my short presentation Rise and Fall of Regionalism in Latin America Facing Regional Changes. First, the role of ideological convergence in regionalism in Latin America. Historically, regionalism in Latin America has developed in three waves. Each has been influenced by distinct ideological doctrines. Firstly, developmentalism or closed regionalism was influenced by the thinking of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, CEPAL, and dependency theory. Secondly, the open regionalism, which was influenced by the neoliberal ideology of the Washington Consensus. Thirdly, post-hegemonic or post-liberal regionalism that is inspired by an anti-imperialist and anti-neoliberal ideology. And in addition, the Pacific Alliance has established the open regionalism of the 1990s. Well, the success or failure of regionalism depends on ideological convergence among presidents. By presidential ideology helps to understand the articulation of the political and economic objective or autonomy and development. In this sense, the arrival of presidents of the right and extreme right, namely the blue or even the brown side, has brought the decline of post-hegemonic regionalism. Consequently, regionalism in Latin America includes diverse patterns of development. Moreover, regional projects differ in their ideological options, goals, and field of action. So that this has generated a split within countries oriented to free trade and those to protectionism. Additionally, this is also manifested in differences in the relation of the states of Latin America with the US. From this perspective, the emergence of regional and sub-regional forums of consultation and cooperation is pendular and cyclical in ideological terms. So, Latin America reflects a diverse and complex regional architecture. As you see, the plethora of regional and sub-regional projects show the following traits: low institutional commitment, unanimous decision-making procedures, and a strong emphasis on national sovereignty. A regional architecture segmented in sub-regions and a disintegration of regional governance structure. Finally, structural deinstitutionalization and presidential diplomacy. My second section is entitled The Structural Weakness of PROSUR. That is promoted by Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Guyana, Paraguay, and Peru. In my view, is as great a structural weakness than UNASUR, Mercosur, and the Pacific Alliance. It is a forum of political dialogue and consultation aimed at isolating Venezuela and attempting to produce regime change. It is a forum of presidential deliberation without organs, powers, rules, and decision-making mechanisms. It is also serves to legitimize domestic actions against leftist forces. It is no different to other ideologicized and institutionally weak initiatives like ALBA. Thereby, PROSUR will not survive the inevitable next change in the political cycle. After all, there are already signs of the weakening of the rise of PROSUR, the possible departure of Macri in Argentina, the social upheaval and political crisis in Ecuador and Chile, presidential problems in Peru, the low popularity of Bolsonaro in Brazil, and the crisis of governability of UK and Colombia. Last but not least important, the unwillingness of Trump to launch a military invasion in Venezuela. The third section is entitled The Return of the Monroe Doctrine. Well, now let us consider the so-called return of the Monroe Doctrine, because Trump has been deploying a policy in the interventionist tradition. This is hostile to the coexistence of diverse forms of government and promotes their change. Well, the Trump administration tries to justify greater US intervention in the region in the following terms. A. The definition of the presence of extra-regional powers in Latin America, such as Russia and China, as a threat. B. The defense of the American way of life, as seen in promoting regime change in Cuba and Venezuela. And C. US assistance to citizens of those countries to permit them to exercise their civil and political rights. But in practical terms, this policy towards Latin America is manifested in A. Great intervention in Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, and B. The state of alert due to Russian military presence in Venezuela and Chinese economic expansion across the region. However, there is a great distance between the high-level rhetoric of the return of the Monroe Doctrine and its implementation in practice, because Trump does not have sufficient resources in the Department of State for overseas operations. Additionally, the administration tries to make up for this lack through the forging of alliances with regional actors who can assume the costs. Moreover, the US agenda towards Latin America remains dominated by the traditional war of drugs, a hostile approach to migration, and the rejection of free trade. In sum, there is no USA strategy towards Latin America that promotes the international economic insertion or development of the region. I now come to the last section of my presentation. Mercosur or the Pacific Alliance remain the regional projects with greatest stability and projection in Latin America, both within the economic sphere. If the commercial tone of Mercosur continues, pragmatic convergence with the Pacific Alliance would be possible, even considering ideological differences, because regional markets have more importance in the global context of rising protectionism and nationalism. Moreover, intra-regional trade and investment and regional value chains are of great importance for Mercosur. Now, regarding the Pacific Alliance, it is a platform for the articulation of free trade mega-bloc between Latin America and the Asia Pacific, creating the status of Pacific Alliance associated member states. We can identify the following applicants: Canada, Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia. And additionally, probably, applicants like Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and South Korea. In this sense, the majority of Latin American states remain inclined towards free trade and their insertion in global markets, particularly the Asia Pacific. Last, but not least important, their interest in maintaining a more autonomous role on the international stage has not declined. Thank you very much for your attention. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.